Welcome. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad with NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Within the Framework webinar series, and today's topic is Teaching Tools, Addressing Challenging Behavior in Everyday Routines with Lisa Fox, Anna Winokur, Megan von der Ems, and Denise Perez-Binder. Thank you very much, and please proceed.
Thanks, Victor. Hi, everybody. We're very excited to have you join us. I'm Lisa Fox. I'm the principal investigator for NCPMI, and you have the stars from the University of South Florida here, Anna Winokur, Megan von der Ems, and Denise Perez-Binder. So we're going to share with you information about TTYC. We're so excited about it. Don't forget about the Q&A. We will leave time for your questions. And Denise, why don't you start us?
Thanks. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited today to share with you our refreshed version of Teaching Tools for Young Children, or TTYC. TTYC has been around for a really long time, as you probably know. It's one of our most downloadable products at NCPMI. So we decided it was time for a refresh. We're excited about the refresh. We think it now will include interventions that will support all different kinds of young learners. And we're excited to share with you today what we feel the purpose of TTYC is, all the new components, forms, ideas, strategies that are included, and a brief overview of how to use the tool. So we feel the purpose for Teaching Tools for Young Children. We want it to be accessible for all teachers of young learners. Can be used and picked up by a teacher on their own, or a teacher and their practitioner or classroom coach, or they can do it together. We feel the new version is going to help teachers support all children, all different kinds of learners that we encounter in our early childhood settings. We've developed supports and resources for teachers to use in real life settings. They should be simple, easy to get your hands on, quick kinds of changes that will increase engagement across many different routines in your early childhood classroom activities. We think that the teaching tools is going to be most effective when teachers and or their coach have a really good idea or good understanding of the function of that challenging behavior. So what's the purpose? Is the child trying to get or get out of by exhibiting that behavior? We want to be really clear that TTYC is not meant to replace a formal functional behavior assessment. It's really not meant to help you understand or get to a function of behavior. It's really there if we kind of get it, we think we understand, and we just need a simple kind of quick fix in the moment. So we think that TTYC can fit in the pyramid model in different places, but we really think around tier 2. If you see a child that's struggling, that may need more practice, that the regular environmental setup, your structured routines, your transitions are not meeting that child's need, this is a great place to consider pulling out the TTYC manual. We also have just added to the website a brand new tier 2 document that guides teachers how to start a tier 2 implementation with a child, for a child, how to use tier 2, what kinds of things could get you to a tier 2. So if you haven't seen that new resource yet, take a look at it. I think it's going to be really exciting, but it kind of guides you to where TTYC will fit. So some things we want you to consider when you are using or getting ready to use teaching tools for young children. We want you to consider the whole child. So think about the child. Do they have maybe medical needs? Do they have some outside experiences that may be triggering different kinds of behaviors at school? Maybe housing issues, healthcare issues, food insecurities, things like that. We want you to make sure that you're helping the child engage authentically with what's happening in the classroom, to not make severe classroom changes to fit that child, but thinking about how to incorporate that child's strengths into what's happening, their preferences into fitting into their daily routines, offering lots of opportunities for kids to make choice on how they can participate. Can they sit? Can they stand? Can they voice an answer? Can they sign an answer? Having different ways that they can be included. And then making sure that we incorporate the child in lots of different routines and activities, like having lots of visual supports, having songs, melodies that they can follow, individualized supports along the way, thinking about maybe outside of the box, things that you wouldn't normally include as a way to participate, thinking about different ways that they can respond outside of our norm. So this is the new cover for TTYC. We think it's beautiful. When you open the guide, this will pop to the contents page. This is what's included in the new guide. So there's a flow chart that starts the guide. We want everyone that's going to try to use TTYC to start at the flow chart. This is going to guide you on how to get to the right activity, to the right intervention at the right time. There's a really new amped up tools for how to talk to families about challenging behavior and how to partner and collaborate with them as you develop your TTYC interventions. Then there's some new refreshed data tools that will help you in your planning process, and then some tools to help you monitor the progress of your plan, just to make sure that we're getting the outcomes for the child that we set out to get. The routine guide is where you'll spend most of your time. So this is the part that breaks down different activities in the early childhood day, and we'll talk about different functions of behavior and then possible interventions that you can try. And then there's a routine plan to let you kind of map out what you're going to do for the child, what's the plan, what's the specific interventions that you can try, so that the teacher and the coach can be on the same page, or the coach can present it to the teacher, or the teacher can present to the coach. Also making sure that we share those things with families all the time.
Great, thanks, Denise. It's a lot, right? There are a lot of pieces to this, so I'm glad you emphasize the flow chart. I'm going to walk people through that a little bit, and then we'll unpack each piece for you. So don't panic yet. We'll help it all make sense to you. So the flow chart is kind of guides you step by step and indicates what of the tools you can use at each of the steps. So of course, the first thing is the child has a behavior of concern. And so the first thing we want you to do is think, is this a behavior that is developmentally expected, right? Do we see children of this age doing this, or is it pretty common, but it's just really hard for staff to cope with, or maybe it's presenting some challenges for peer interactions? If what we think that this that what the child is doing is what we've seen other kids to do. And really, we probably just need to tweak some of our universal strategies. Do that. Like, you don't need to move forward with a really specified plan. So if the behavior is developmentally expected and you could beef up your universal interventions, we advise you to beef up your universal interventions. But if what you see is, no, this child is having problems with engagement, communication, play with peers, or their interactions in ways I'm not expecting, or in ways that's not responsive to the things that we know to do, and we have really wonderful routines, and we're trying hard to make connections, and the child's still having a difficult time, then TTYC, you can move to the next step in TTYC. So if the child, again, we're going to move to step 2 because we believe this child is having behavior that we really didn't expect. It's out of the norm developmentally. The next thing we want you to do is nail down the routine where this is happening most. And we have a great form that you can use for doing that. I'll show you that in just a minute. So you can use this form to kind of scan what's going on across a day, and you might just use it in one day, or you might do it in several days to nail down exactly when behavior is happening. We also have another form that you would use at this stage if we're going to move forward with TTYC, where you can begin to track some really simple data. And of course, everything we do is data-based, right? And we want to make sure you'll be excited about this because it's very simple, but it'll really give you important information. And you could start now in the process to begin to track when is the child most engaged and when am I seeing the most behavior that is disruptive or unexpected. If you're working with a classroom coach, we advise you to do this whole process with your classroom coach who can really help you navigate both the forms and your thinking. At this step, there's another piece of information we think is so important, which is connecting with the family. And I'm going to not share much about that. Megan is going to talk us through all of our wonderful family tools. But that one's called My Teacher Wants to Know. And this is when we think you would pick up My Teacher Wants to Know and use something like that in this work. So the routine analysis form, it's super simple. You're just putting the time of day, what the routine is, morning meetings, snack time, for example, and then the likelihood that the child has challenging behavior is, does the child almost never has challenging behavior in this routine, sometimes has challenging behavior, almost always. You could use it as a reflection tool at the end of the day. You could recall what happened. You might have enough information in your observations of the child just to complete it really quickly and kind of get your head around, where am I going to start with this child? We always like to say knowing that when children have problem behavior is important. Also knowing when children don't have problem behavior often helps inform us as we develop our interventions. And then here's an image of the behavior and engagement tracking form. Super simple. You're writing down what the routine is that I'm observing, and maybe I figured out the routine with the most behavior using my routine analysis form, and I'm pretty ready to go. We're going to work on behaviors that happen during nap time. And so I start taking data on the level of engagement, and for nap time, it would be following the rules and expectations of nap, and then the level of behavior that occurs in the routine. Start collecting it now so that we have those data over time as we begin the intervention. So the next step is to ensure that you know the function of the behavior. So just like Denise said, this is not tier 3, right? We're moving ahead with TTYC only when we know what the function is. And often teachers know the function, they're just not sure what to do about it. I think I've had teachers say that. I know why, if we're having behavior at circle, he doesn't want to be in circle. He's trying to get out. But what do I do about it? He needs to be here. And so that's when TTYC is really a wonderful resource. So at this level, we do have another form I'll show you briefly next that'll help you just ensure you're thinking through those ABCs, right? So I've got the behavior in mind. I'm going to look to that routine. I'm going to look to nap time for that child, and I'm going to think about what are the antecedents that happen and how do people respond to it? And that's going to help me feel either validated on my hunch about the function or maybe help expose what the function is. If the function is not clear, if it's muddy to you, if when you talk to your teaching assistant, they think it's something else and you're not sure and you're waffling back and forth, that's probably a child we need to do tier 3 with to really work through understanding the function through functional behavior assessment. But if everyone's on the same page, yes, this is what the behavior is about. We just need some really great ideas to prevent and address the behavior and teach the child new skills. That's when we get to go to the teaching tools routine guide. So this is that form that'll help you kind of figure out function. This is something you'll probably use one time as you begin to decide what the function is, what routine am I going to focus on. And the way you start that is you think about the behavior, you go right to the routine. Maybe you got that from the routine analysis. What routine am I going to focus on? And then you think about what happened before. We've listed all the common things we can think of that are often triggers for children. There's always an other. And so you could write in if you wanted to. What do people do in response? And so the laundry list of the typical responses, and then really trying to nail down your function. So this is a really great resource that'll make you feel more secure, like, yeah, I got it. We know what the function is. So I'm going to pass it to Anna, and she's going to really unpack for you the routine guide and how the routine guide's used to build a plan.
So before we dive into the routine guide, I just want to tell you the purpose and what it's about. So it's really exciting to get so many strategies and ideas, but the purpose is to select those prevention and intervention strategies. So we select strategies to prevent the behavior, how to respond to the behavior, and what to teach, what we want to see instead. So what we've done is we've identified strategies to use within routines, and we've tried to think of the most common routines that we would see in early childhood classrooms. So hopefully the need that you have will be met by one of those routines. But it can't stress enough the function, those forms and process that Lisa discussed really is so critical and essential before we use the routine guide, because we must know the function to make sure we're identifying accurate strategies that align with what the child needs. So you'll notice when you dive into the routine guide, there's lots of ideas for strategies, and you're just going to select certain ones that fit your needs within each routine. And you'll notice that the strategies are going to vary by activity and by function. So what you'll notice that if a child is eloping during large group, that's going to be different than a child who might be crying during nap time. So it's so critical to not only drill down into where we're seeing this behavior happen the most, what routine is occurring the most often, and that routine analysis guide would help you with that. We need to know then the function to really make sure that we're going to select those three types of strategies that I mentioned. So when we're thinking about prevention strategies, these are those strategies that we're going to put in place so we can ensure that the behavior that's challenging is less likely to occur. We're going to think about several strategies that might match the needs for that child. You're going to notice when you dig in and you're thinking about the application to your programs or your own classroom, there are going to be ones that you read and you think, oh yes, Anna would respond to this. And there might be ones that just don't fit your particular situation. So when you're thinking about prevention, you're thinking about that child and what that child's needs are. And just as a pro tip, we're going to create those visual supports if that's the strategy that we selected to implement in the plan. And we're going to make sure that they're durable and laminate and they're there to last for the duration. Then we're also going to think about respond. And we know that we can do a lot of great prevention things, but the behavior is still going to occur. So that's why when is bold, because we like to say if, but we know if the child's been engaging in this kind of behavior for a while, it probably works for them. It's not going to disappear overnight. The word consistent, I can't say enough, is so real. It's so crucially important. So when you do decide on your response strategies, make sure all the adults in the room know what those strategies are. So everybody's staying consistent, and we're doing it we're doing it during that routine, every time that routine occurs. And then when we respond, we have to include a strategy that will help the child know what to do instead of that behavior that they're engaging in. And then we need to teach. We can do all the prevention and response that under the sun, but if we don't teach those skills that they can use as a replacement, we're not going to see the long-term impacts and outcomes that we would like to see. So think about what kind of social skill or communication skill would help the child to not use that challenging behavior. So if they were engaging in this particular activity, they could not be engaging in this particular challenging behavior. So we're just going to pick one or two new skills to focus on. We can always add more later, but you're just going to select one or two right now for the ones that are the most important. So maybe the child's engaging in lots of challenging behaviors. You're going to pick the one that is the most important in terms of what that child needs. And a lot of times we think about the classroom day. What is the most intense behavior that's happening? And we're going to select our skills to teach based on that. So when I'm going to show you the guide, or if you have been able to access it online, you'll see that there is a long list of strategies. So not all the you're not going to use all the strategies that are provided in the guide. You're just going to select the ones that are not only well matched to the child, but also what fits your teaching style or the teaching style of the teachers you support. Because we know too that you're going to read some of the strategies and feel like that just doesn't quite match your particular teaching style. But we have to ensure that those strategies are individualized, that we're capitalizing on the children's interests, that we're having discussions about what their strengths are, that we're embedding that child's preferences, and we're taking into consideration the skills of that particular child. All right, so we're gonna just use the guide really briefly, walk you through. So the teacher determined that Jalen needs some extra support. He was just demonstrating some behaviors that were really challenging to her, not responsive to our typical developmentally appropriate responses. So the teacher decides to conduct some simple data collection, maybe even using the tools that Lisa had shown us. And they determined that the behavior of concern, while there were many, the one they wanted to really focus on is inconsolable crying during large group. And when they really dove into that, they're looking for the function, because we know we can't decide on any of those strategies till we have the function. They really thought that it was that Jalen wanted to leave large group because he wanted to go to centers. That was his preferred activity. So he wanted to avoid large group altogether. So now we have this information. We can now go to the routine guide. It is linked, so if you can print it, it is really long. You might want to just keep it as an electronic document and just print pages as you need them. But so here, because the teacher decided large group is when we're seeing this inconsolable crying, we just cannot seem to co-regulate, self-regulate. Jalen's not able to do that. So if you click on the large group, it'll take you right to that specific section. And then that's where you'll start to see the strategies. So the routine we've already determined is large group. The function we determined is that the child wants to leave the large group. So we go to prevent first. And this is just an example of what it looks like. What are some of the strategies that we think could prevent the child from wanting to leave large group in the first place? And you would then select maybe one or two things that you are going to try to make sure that we're trying to prevent that behavior. So we have here the activity and the function. So here we're focusing on prevent. And then our next slide is going to take us through respond. Oh, sorry, I I lied. So underneath each routine, you're going to notice that there is a section that says more strategies for toddlers and developmentally young children. So even if you are teaching younger children, or the children in your classroom might be at all kinds of different developmental levels, you might just consider the fact of where is that child, and look to this section to help you identify strategies that are more developmentally appropriate for young children. Now we'll get to the response. Oh, no, now I keep lying to you all. I apologize. Now we're going to get to the teaching of the new skills. We're going to respond last. So then we're going to select this. Remember, we're not going to do all of it. We're going to think about what our teaching style is. We're going to think about what are things that we're doing at universal practices. We're going to think about what are those teaching new skills? What is that going to be? We're going to pick one, maybe two, and we're going to introduce that to that child. Remember, the new skill is going to be that behavior that they engage in, which makes it almost impossible to engage in the behavior that's challenging. Now we got to the response part. So again, too, you're thinking about this response part is what we're going to do when the challenging behavior occurs, or should the challenging behavior occur. We need to be in agreement of how we're going to respond, because again, going back to that word consistent. So you might pick one or two strategies that are going to work. If you try to use all of the strategies that are here, it'll just really feel overwhelming. It'll feel like you're really just spinning your wheels. But if you select the one or two that you feel like is a match for you as a teacher and meets the need for that child, I would select just that one. And then you'll notice too that this response has some more strategies for toddlers and developmentally young children. Some of the strategies that you'll see appear across routines, but we have to remember too that the function of the behavior is really so critical and essential to make sure we go to the right routine and then we go to the right function to get the right list of strategies that we want to use to respond. So we've done that, and we're going to the child routine plan. So we're now able to write a plan for Jalen. And we're going to focus on large group because that's when this behavior is happening. We don't want to, we've decided that the inconsolable, looking at the data, it almost always happens during large group, and it's for long periods of time. So I think that Jalen does this to avoid staying in large groups. So they went to the routine guide, they went to the prevent, and they decided that they're going to offer multiple ways for the child to engage during group activities. So going back to embedding that skills and interests of that particular child. Then they went to the response, and that they've decided that they're going to provide a choice of a preferred activity that allows that child to stay engaged while they're practicing waiting for their turns in other parts of the activity. They felt like that would be really would work well for Jalen. That way he can stay, he's practicing waiting, and he's still engaged in large group. But what they want to do is they want to teach him to follow the large group visual schedule. They have the schedule, they reference it throughout large group, but what Jalen really needs is he needs to know how to follow that schedule. It's just not meaningful enough the way it's happening currently, so we want to think about if we can teach him to do that, perhaps that will let him know centers are coming, and perhaps he won't engage in that inconsolable crying because he will understand at what point in the day that centers will occur. So this would be it's meant to be a very simple plan. But it does use, of course, the function identifying that routine, and then we have our prevent, our respond, and our teach.
Thanks, Anna. That was great. And it's so nice to have an illustration. All right, I'm going to turn it to Megan so she can really talk about how we partner with families. We've given you a lot of guidance and tools to be able to do this work in partnership with families. So Megan?
Sure. So that key word there is partner. So throughout the routine guide, what you'll notice is that family communication is prioritized. The message is very clear: communicate strengths to family. So as we're thinking about our communication, we're strength-based, and we're going to make those connections with families early and often. It's really about developing a plan and these ideas with family input that helps you move forward as partners. So even though the plan is being implemented in the classroom setting, it's really about brainstorming and planning with families and keeping the conversation focused on like what we as teachers and practitioners in the classroom will do differently. So the first communication about starting the TTYC process sets that stage for future communication. So you saw in the flowchart that Lisa reviewed that it kind of says this is a good point to connect with a family. So you make that initial connection and you let them know, their child, if we're talking about Jalen that Anna just talked about, that Jalen's having difficulty with that large group routine, that activity, and that you'll be developing ideas about what you might do differently to help Jalen engage during a large group. From the first conversation, it's really important to communicate with families and their preferred method of communication, and that's going to look different for each child that you might be developing a plan for. It could be phone, email, text, whatever that communication method is for that first contact. It might change as you have further conversations, and then always in the family's preferred language. Affirming and validating feelings or concerns that families share is going to be so important. So affirming and validating might sound like, it sounds like you've tried lots of ideas too at home for helping Jael when it's time to clean up, or thank you for sharing that you're feeling frustrated right now. I'm hoping that we can come up with some new ideas to help your child during large group time. The goal is to emphasize that it's about collaboration and that we're doing this together, even though the strategies are going to be used in the classroom. That partnership will hopefully allow the family maybe to try strategies or to give input on what could be helpful. We want to make sure that we're allowing time for families to engage in that communication with us, and we want to use those open-ended questions. So on page 6 of the routine guide, you'll find a list of kind of some nice open-ended questions that you can use to elicit that kind of information from families. So what are your thoughts if we tried to provide support to your child during large group in the classroom? What have you tried at home to help your child? Tell me what your bedtime routine looks like. And do you have some ideas of how we might use those steps to help with rest time, in the classroom? How would you like me to share updates and progress with you? So really being family-centered and allowing families to have some choice and input into the plan. And we're really focusing conversations, even though you're going to engage the families, on the child's engagement in the routine. And as you're engaging in those communications with families, you might want to know more. And there are resources embedded. So in the appendix section of the routine guide, you'll find these resources. So the first one we want to highlight, Lisa mentioned it. It's called My Teacher Wants to Know. It's in Appendix D, and it's a sample. I'm going to really highlight that. This is a sample form that you may use. So we encourage you to develop one for your program to use. Look at this, see what works for your program in terms of what do you want to know that will be helpful for you as you implement strategies in the classroom. You can translate the form into languages used by families in your program. And the goal is to gather that desired information that families that can really help you in implementing strategies and coming up with ideas. So this form and this process should feel supportive. We're asking what makes your child excited? How do you know when your child is feeling sad or feeling tired? And so some really useful information that while it might be about the child in their home, that can really be beneficial for plugging those ideas into the plan. One of, I think, the key things that I hear from teachers and practitioners as we're thinking about supporting children that may have behavior that we're supporting is around how do we have and navigate those conversations with families, and that I might not feel as confident or as comfortable having these types of conversations. And particularly, how do I introduce the idea that we're going to be trying some new strategies for their child to engage in the classroom routine. So the tools that are also, there's several tools included in the routine guide that really focus on ideas for how we navigate those conversations. So the first is a sample email. It's found in Appendix C, and it really is that. It's just an example of what could that introduction communication look like. It could be in a phone call, it could be in an email. And what I want to point out are some of those things that we're going to touch base on in a minute are those pieces that I can put into family conversations, that if I start using them regularly, the conversations feel more natural. They feel like something I can kind of plan ahead of time to make those conversations maybe go a little smoother or have some predictability in them. So things like doing a warm greeting and checking in with the families and making those personal connections. It's relational, the work that we're doing when we're supporting a child in the classroom and connecting with the family, making sure that we're always highlighting strength, and a strength that's meaningful about the child, that the family wants to hear, clearly communicating the purpose. So what is this communication about? What is our goal of us connecting? Inviting the families to be part of the plan, coming up with those ideas, and then checking in, like, does this sound like a good plan to you? So that flow is something that you'll see in the email. But if you go to the next slide, Lisa, there we go. This is kind of a template that can help navigate those conversations with families. That the resources, there are several resources in TTYC, one about initial communication with families, one called Partnering with Families and Finalizing the Plan, and then communicating with the family about the child's progress. When we look at this flow and we use that predictability, that sounds familiar, right? That's one of our pyramid model strategies. When we have some routine, predictability helps us kind of feel more confident in our conversations of talking with families and engaging with them. So we have those check-ins, we share those strengths, communicate our purpose, make a plan, problem solve, because sometimes we have to do that. Not every conversation might go as smoothly. And then we review, we do that check-in. And what this looks like in the routine guide, we have 3 of these in the appendix that gives us those parts of those conversations and then ideas of what that may include. So checking in might have a greeting and then validate a challenge the family's experiencing, and then some examples of what that sounds like. Not meant to be a script for you to follow, but a way to get ideas and practice maybe those conversations ahead of time and draw on these as you're planning and including the family in the progress from the very start to updating how are things going in the routine that you've selected to support that child in.
Thanks, Megan. That was great. I'm going to invite everyone to put your questions. We have a couple in the Q&A section so that we can take them. And while you formulate your questions, I'm going to stop sharing slides for a few minutes. And we'll just take your questions and talk as a panel. But I want to ask my team kind of to highlight what they think is most exciting about this new revised TTYC, what they encourage you to look for when you're able to go and take a look. Megan, did you have one you wanted to start with?
Really hard to pick one, right? That's a tough question. Mine might be a big reflection, and I think it's that from the start to the finish, if you're familiar with the previous routine guide, that there's a complete refresh of kind of everything, how the process remains the same, but the time and energy went into making sure that each and every child, if they needed support, were honored, and that the strategies feel reflective of that, and that children with diverse abilities and needs are included, where we know that behavior at any point, all young children can have challenging behavior in the classroom and in our environments. And so that I think that the way that the strategies were looked at, and that's really about ways children can participate. And Denise mentioned that authentic engagement, that feels really important and was, I think, a big driver of the updates that our team worked on. and those inclusions of support so that all children can be successful. I know that's very global, but it feels really important. I think that's something that we would all feel really strongly about, that it really is about each and every child and what do they need to be successful and engaged and supported in their classroom community.
Cool, great. Anna, do you have thoughts? What are you most excited about?
I love the decision tree. I think we
Mm.
sometimes get paralyzed when we're dealing with behavior that's challenging, and it's just a good place to start and guide you through what you're thinking. I also love the routine analysis guide. I feel like we hear a lot, teachers will say that this behavior happens all day long. And when we have them actually stop and think about or pay attention to each individual activity, they start to realize, oh, it never happens during centers, but almost always happens during nap, which just helps you focus so much more. When you feel like the behaviors all day, it feels unmanageable. When you know you're just going to focus during nap, that is so much more manageable. I think those two things will really help many, many folks.
Great. Denise, you have anything you want to call out?
I agree with Anna. I love the new decision tree. I think that's going to help guide a lot of, like, we think we know, but when we have the tree and we follow those easy steps, I think it's going to help guide people. I also am very enamored with the hyperlinks. So if you find a resource that you like, you don't have to dig into multiple places. So for instance, maybe the teach is to get the Tucker Turtle scripted story. It's typically hyperlinked. So if you're using the electronic version, you can click on the link and it'll go right to the story. I love that.
Great. Yeah, we tried to include a whole bunch of places, not just our places where you could find the strategies we've developed on NCPMI, but also the other websites where there are lovely visuals and ideas of things that people can use. Anything else that we want to call out? We'll go to Q&A.
No, I
Yeah.
just got done talking about families, but I do encourage that. I feel really strongly that it's something that we might not always be thinking about when we're thinking tier 2. I know we do such a good job of partnering with families in our tier 3 interventions as we go through maybe for our most intensive behavioral support needs. But I think when we engage families early, when there are those first concerns and we're thinking we want to do something differently for this child, the ability to partner with families and have them be part of the decision-making process and provide them regular updates. I think all those tools are really helpful. And even if you're not using the TTYC, I think those resources are still helpful because I think it's one of the biggest things I hear from teachers around. I don't always feel comfortable, or I'm not as confident talking with families as I am maybe with others. And so I think they're great resources to dig into and really become familiarized with.
While you're talking about families, this is in chat, and it's about sometimes we perceive a parent as challenging or not really aware of behavior. I'm interested, Megan, in how you kind of guide people to think about that differently.
Yeah, so I think we have to remember, I think especially when we're supporting families around behavior, that families are coming to us with their own experiences with, I'm going to say, the school system or maybe they were in different programs and weren't supported in ways or maybe they weren't supported, or maybe they are coming with a history of not feeling supported around their child. So I think it's really important to remember, kind of assume positive intent when we're interacting and supporting families, because we need to meet them where they're at. And but that can be challenging when it feels like maybe our relationship isn't strong. But I think it's that connecting early and really starting to share those strengths and being consistent. I don't know if I think it was Anna who was like, we're consistent with our strategy implementation, and we have to be kind of persistent and consistent in our communication with families. I think the more we become comfortable sharing, like we're focusing on engagement, we're going to pick one routine in the classroom that families can see, that we are not saying something globally about their child, but we're really here to support their child participate, be engaged. Yeah, and I'm looking at the chat, and Michelle said parents can push our buttons too. And so I'm not saying it's all about relationships. There's so much more, but it is relational work. And so I think that's what people are saying is really important to reflect on and utilize the tools in TTYC, the way it's explained. And I think if you kind of stick to some of those major points, it's really helpful in partnering with families from the beginning.
It also feels like if you enter into the partnership in the ways that you've described, and I think some of the tools, and you developed many of them for us as we worked on this guide with the rest of the team. I think if we enter into our partnerships that way, build that relationship. I mean, we can do both. So you can feel less urgency about they really need to come to grips that this child needs more support than what they're getting. They don't, right? This is for your routine and in the setting where you are. And through that way, you're approaching, inviting their input, but you have responsibility. Like, I'm asking you to help me do what I do better in support of your child, who I completely accept, will build enough of those connections, right? That eventually perhaps we'll get there, right? Be able to have more difficult conversations, or they'll see you as a supporter versus someone who might also be critical of their parenting. All right, so there's a question about data tools. I'm going to kind of throw it to you, Anna, because you thought about these a lot, and kind of what are the data tools we have? Are those data tools to determine function, or is that a different process? And then how long do you collect data when you do something like TTYC? So that's a lot, but you can start. We all have opinions about this.
So I will say that the routine analysis guide is a good place to start, and that way will help you really get an understanding of when is the behavior happening more frequently, and when is it not happening at all, which is always a good piece of data information to know. It's not going to give you the function. So what we think about too is, are we capturing any other kinds of behavioral data? Are we doing behavior incident reports? Are we taking any anecdotal records about what kinds of things we're seeing? That's a piece that can help inform us. If we are working with a coach, having the coach come in during the routine that we identified is the most problematic, would also be another set of eyes to observe and to have that conversation of, why do we think this behavior is occurring? We're thinking about the behavior has meaning. We're operating under the guide itself is thinking about pyramid model practices. And we know in pyramid that behavior has meaning and behavior is communication. There's lots of resources there and on the Challenging Behavior website that can help you think about function. And then we're trying to remember this is tier 2, and we're thinking TTYC, right? It doesn't have to be tier 2, but it could be. We're not thinking tiered individualized. So it's meant to be simple data collection. So you do want to start collecting the data of when you see that behavior occurring. Using that behavior engagement form would be a great tool to use. And you want to make sure that you are recording it for minimum of 2 weeks. Think at least, and maybe you all might think a little bit differently, so please chime in. But we want to make sure that we're not just, we're looking over the 2 weeks. Are we beginning to see any difference? That's kind of thing. Did we guess the function correctly? Are we seeing any improvements in behavior? And then can either continue with the plan as is or revise as needed.
Great. I think that's good. Someone has asked, I've kind of lost the one. One question is about, in our program, we're seeing a lot of biters. And I think the teachers and I have identified, but we don't have a consistent response. So Denise, do we think, do we go to if this was a toddler classroom, are we going to TTYC, or might a coach and the teachers come up with a different strategy?
For me, I always think if you have a lot of kids that are struggling with behaviors, then for me in my head, I want to move back down to our universal practices. And so make sure that we've structured the class in a way that helps children know how to navigate and how to engage, and with that we've taught social skills and play skills, if we think it's happening during play, that we work on the relationship and setting up the environment to help those behaviors not be necessary to get out of things or get attention, whatever you think their function of biting is for. But that's my initial impression when I hear lots of kids doing lots of things.
Yeah. And I think biting kind of falls in that developmentally expected, especially in some ages.
For
So
sure.
it could be a good topic of how do we respond? What could it be
Mm-hmm.
about? Let's all get on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question about whether or not it's available in Spanish, and we wish it was. And often we rely on our partners to do those translations and share back with us. We're happy to share our design files if somebody wants to do the translation and do that. Obviously, all our materials are for free, and we really want them to be usable. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resources this round. We wanted to get this out as soon as possible. In the future, we might have the resources to be able to translate it and post it in Spanish. It's a hefty guide. I don't remember how many pages it is.
It's a
50
lot.
pages? It's a lot. And then there was a question about kind of this in tier 2, and I want to circle back to that. If you're thinking a child needs a tier 2 intervention around difficult behaviors, TTYC can be your go-to, but please look, Denise called out that handout and we posted it with the webinar, and it's in our resource library. It's pretty new, and it's, tier 2 is much more than that, right? Tier 2 is not just about behavior, it's about teaching social and emotional skills explicitly for children who need those extra skill building. And so that guidance will help you think about TTYC as one resource. There are many that you might use in developing tier 2, and it would be great for, yes, your tier 2 team to have this and to be able to rely on it. And perhaps a child needs both. Perhaps a child might need this kind of tier 2 intervention around some difficulties in the classroom, and maybe another tier 2 intervention focused on a particular social emotional peer interaction skill or something like that. Anyone see any other questions in the chat we ought to take on? Anyone see one you want to take on? We have just a couple minutes, like 2.
I think just remember that TTYC is not to replace your tier 3 or your formal FBA. It's if you have a really clear idea of what the function is and you want to give that a try. I've seen a lot of questions about if we don't agree on the function or we don't agree on the behavior. This is only if we're clear, we got it, we know it, and we want to give this a try.
I think that's a great wrap up. And actually, way back when we first developed teaching tools, it was about that. It was a preschool coordinator who said to me, I think my teachers know what the behavior's about. They just don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
And so we really see this as the ready, like unpacking all of NCPMI's brain into that routine guide of what is possible for interventions.
Thank you so very much to all of our panelists for their wonderful insights. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser or scan the QR code. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.